So many of the world's biggest companies have made these huge public promises to go green. But then you look at one of their biggest sources of pollution, shipping, and, well, the progress just isn't there. So what gives? Why is it so incredibly hard for companies that say they want to be green to clean up their shipping? Let's dig in.
We've all been there, right? You click buy online, and a few days later, a package just magically shows up at your door. And the best part? The shipping was free. But that convenience, it has a massive and pretty much invisible environmental cost. Every single truck, every ship, every plane, they're all burning fuel, all pumping out emissions. And when you add all of that up, it creates one of the toughest climate puzzles for any business to try and solve.
So, okay, let's try to put a number on that hidden cost. Because honestly, the scale of this problem is way bigger than most of us probably think.
Get this. For a lot of big retailers and manufacturers, the emissions from just their freight, trucks, trains, and ships, can account for a staggering 30% of their entire carbon footprint. Think about that. This isn't just some small side issue. For them, it's a huge piece of their climate problem.
So, if it's such a huge slice of the emissions pie, why is it so tough to deal with? Well, the answer actually starts with something a little wonky: how companies count their carbon emissions in the first place.
It all breaks down into these three buckets, or scopes. Scope 1, that's the easy one. It's the pollution a company makes directly, like from its own factories. Scope 2 is also pretty straightforward. That's for the energy it buys, like the electricity for its offices. But then there's Scope 3. And Scope 3 is the real beast here. It's basically everything else in the whole supply chain. And that is exactly where shipping lives.
And here's the catch with Scope 3 emissions. They come from things a company doesn't actually own or control. They're not the ones who own the shipping fleets or employ the truck drivers. So they're held responsible for all those emissions, but they have very little direct power to just switch them off.
Okay, so given how complicated this all is, what would make a company even try to tackle a messy Scope 3 problem like shipping? It turns out there's this really powerful idea from organizational research that explains what really makes businesses tick.
It's called legitimacy theory, and at its heart, it's actually pretty simple. Companies need what's called a social license to operate. Basically, they do things not just for profit, but to be seen as legitimate, as doing the right thing, being acceptable in the eyes of all of us, their customers, their investors, and the public. It really all boils down to keeping up a good reputation.
But here's the thing. This idea of legitimacy isn't just one thing. It actually comes in three different flavors. First, you've got pragmatic legitimacy. This is driven by pure self-interest. The question is always, what's in it for us? Like saving money. Then there's moral legitimacy. This one is all about doing the right thing. It asks, is this the correct action to take? And finally, there's cognitive legitimacy, which is basically about fitting in and following the crowd. The question there is everyone else doing it?
All right, now this is where it starts to get really interesting. Because when we take this theory and look inside a typical company, we find the real reason everything gets stuck. It's a huge conflict between two really important departments.
So on one side, you've got the transportation department. Their entire job is to move stuff from point A to point B as cheap as possible. Their world runs on pragmatic legitimacy. It's all about the bottom line. What's in it for us means saving cash on fuel. But then on the other side, you have the sustainability department. Their whole mission is to hit the company's green goals, and they're driven by moral legitimacy. They're asking what's the right thing to do for the planet. These two departments, they are speaking completely different languages.
And don't just take my word for it. Researchers talked to managers inside these big companies, and they confirmed it. As one person said, when you're talking about green ideas in transportation, you have to talk about dollars and cents. Fuel costs get people's attention. Vague goals about emissions, not so much.
And the data makes this crystal clear. For the folks who are actually in charge of the trucks and ships, the pragmatic stuff, like saving money, is what drives them. The moral goals, the emissions targets, they're a really distant second. It's pretty obvious the motivation to act is almost entirely about the money.
So this internal fight creates what we can call a legitimacy gap. It's this empty space between what a company says it wants to do publicly and what its own internal departments are actually set up to do.
And this right here is the absolute core of the problem. The department with the actual power to change shipping, transportation, is motivated by saving money. But the department with the mission, sustainability, doesn't have the operational control to make anything happen. You have this fundamental disconnect between power and purpose, and the company's big green goals, they just get lost in translation somewhere in the middle.
So how in the world do you fix this? How do you bridge that gap? Well, the research points to a few key things. First, sustainability has to learn to speak the language of the transportation department, framing everything in terms of return on investment and fuel savings. Second, the sustainability team needs some real teeth, a real seat at the table where the operational decisions get made. And finally, and this is the big one, the goal can't just live in one department. It has to be a company-wide priority, pushed from the very top.
And that leaves us with a final, really important question. Because this whole dynamic we've just unpacked, it doesn't just apply to shipping. It applies to almost every part of corporate sustainability. So if cold, hard, pragmatic benefits are the only things that truly drive action inside these massive, complex companies, then maybe the biggest challenge of all is figuring out how to make doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing mean exactly the same thing.